Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, you may press star one, unmute your phone, and record your name and organization to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Jay. Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning and welcome to this U.S. Food and Drug Administration media briefing on the FDA's proposed rule aimed at helping to ensure the safety and effectiveness of laboratory-developed tests. The press release on today's announcement has been posted to the FDA's website. I'm Jim McKinney with the FDA's Office of Media Affairs. In a moment, I will turn it over to FDA Commissioner Dr. Robert Califf for opening remarks. Following Commissioner Califf, Dr. Jeff Shuren, the Director for the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, will provide brief remarks. After the remarks, we will then move to the question and answer portion of the call. For that portion of the call, Dr. Shuren will be joined by Elizabeth Hillebrenner, the Associate Director for Scientific and Regulatory Programs at CDRH. Reporters on the phone will be in listen-only mode until we open the call up for questions. As a reminder, this audio call is being recorded and live streamed on the FDA's YouTube channel. When asking a question, please state your name and affiliation. Also, please ensure questions pertain to today's announcement and limit yourself to one question and one follow-up so we can get to as many questions as possible. With that, I will now turn the call over to Dr. Califf.
Thanks for joining us today. Today, the FDA is taking an important step in addressing one of the most significant gaps in the U.S. healthcare system, the safety and effectiveness of laboratory-developed tests, or LDTs. These widely used tests are not generally coming to the FDA for review or otherwise complying with FDA requirements. This leaves Americans vulnerable to making important healthcare choices based on potentially faulty or inaccurate test results. This should not continue. Laboratory-developed tests play a central role in U.S. healthcare, and many are similar to other tests that do come into the FDA for review. This approach no longer makes sense and puts U.S. patients at risk. Folks know I spent most of my career in academic medicine. Some of my colleagues in academic medical centers have expressed concern that FDA oversight would cause them to stop making tests and that it's not necessary because there are no problems. I respectfully disagree based on my experiences at the FDA, in academia, and in leadership roles in health systems. And to the extent that academic medical center labs may need sufficient funding to assure the right safeguards are in place, I sincerely hope that the leadership of these academic institutions will provide the necessary support to best protect patients. The FDA has long noted our interest in working with laboratories, including academic medical center laboratories, on crafting an approach that helps to assure that all tests are safe and effective and that fosters responsible innovation. We'll be seeking comment on the right approach, including whether specific policies should apply for labs in appropriate circumstances. It's my hope that they'll engage with us as constructive partners. Every American should have confidence in their test results. Today's action is a step towards making that goal a reality. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Shuren, who will tell you more about the proposed rule.
Thank you, Dr. Califf, and we appreciate everyone joining us today. The proposed rule announced today is designed to help ensure the safety and effectiveness of laboratory-developed tests, which are widely used to screen and diagnose patients, as well as to determine whether or not someone receives treatment and what treatment they may receive. Despite the important role LDTs play in patient care, some of these tests perform poorly or don't work at all. Because LDTs aren't generally coming to the FDA for review, nor are additional safeguards in place, patients cannot be assured their tests provide accurate results. This uncertainty puts Americans at risk. The FDA currently oversees tests made by non-laboratory manufacturers, but has not generally overseen tests made by laboratories. Since the 1970s, the FDA has taken an enforcement discretion approach for LDTs because at that time they were mostly low risk, manufactured in small volumes, and used for specialized needs of a local patient population. However, the LDT market looks drastically different today than it did roughly 50 years ago. The complexity and volume of these tests have evolved dramatically. Now, many LDTs are increasingly relying on high-tech instrumentation and software being performed in large volumes and presenting cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This bifurcated approach contributes to safety problems, disincentivizes innovation by non-laboratory manufacturers, and makes the U.S. vulnerable to national security threats that labs may not even know exist because our LDTs are not coming to the FDA for review. Because the FDA doesn't exercise the same level of oversight of these tests compared to other tests, there's no national monitoring or reporting of problems with LDTs, or even a database of all the LDTs being used in the U.S. That means no one truly knows how many of these tests are out there or who makes which one, let alone which tests have a track record of inaccurate results and problems and which don't. Patients and consumers deserve better. The proposed rule announced today would amend the FDA's regulations to make explicit that IVDs are devices under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, including when the manufacturer of the test is a laboratory. The rulemaking proposal also describes the phase-out of the FDA's general enforcement discretion approach to LDTs. This means they would be held to the same review expectations as tests made by non-laboratories. However, as I'll explain in a moment, we are also seeking comment on alternative enforcement approaches to best facilitate innovation while providing the American people and their providers appropriate assurances of the safety and effectiveness of the tests they use. The proposed phase-out is intended to better protect the public health by helping to assure the safety and effectiveness of the IVDs offered as LDTs, while avoiding undue disruption to the test market. After this phase-out, the FDA generally would expect IVD makers to meet the same applicable requirements, except where meeting certain requirements under the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments can be leveraged. However, the FDA is seeking comment on alternative enforcement approaches for some LDTs. For example, the FDA has requested information on the approach of continued enforcement discretion with respect to pre-market review and quality system requirements for some or all categories of tests currently on the market, while still enforcing reporting and surveillance requirements and taking appropriate action when problematic tests are identified. The FDA has also requested information on a tailored approach for LDTs made by academic medical center laboratories and applying a longer phase-out period tailored for smaller laboratories. Finally, we're seeking comment on whether we should consider leveraging existing oversight programs, such as those administered by the New York State Department of Health and Veterans Health Administration as appropriate. In addition, the FDA is working to facilitate the increased use of our third-party review program. We look forward to receiving feedback on these and other issues. The FDA believes this proposal will not only improve patient safety, but also advance responsible innovation by both laboratory and non-laboratory IVD manufacturers alike. This proposal would better assure the safety and effectiveness of LDTs and remove a disincentive for non-laboratory manufacturers to develop novel tests when they can be faced with immediate competition from unproven LDTs intended for the same uses. Leveling the playing field may foster innovation by non-laboratory manufacturers who are positioned to make safe and effective novel tests available to many labs, but are choosing not to due to the current bifurcated approach. The FDA has a responsibility to make sure patients, consumers, and providers have access to safe and effective tests, regardless of where those tests are made. This proposed rule is an important step to help ensure that healthcare decisions are made based on accurate test results that patients and providers can trust. Well, thank you, and now I'll turn it back to the moderator to begin questions and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Shuren. At this time, we will begin the question and answer portion of the briefing. As a reminder, this call is being recorded. When asking a question, please state your name and affiliation. Also, please ensure questions pertain to today's announcement and limit yourself to one question and one follow-up so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Operator, we'll take the first question.
Thank you. Celine of Bloomberg Law, your line is open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So I know that the FDA has traditionally tried to pursue legislation in this area, most recently, especially through the VALID Act. Is the FDA still working with lawmakers to try to do this? I know there were some concerns from groups on making sure that, there's a law passed first and that it includes a framework that would be specific to lab-developed tests. Is there any comment you have on that? Thank you.
We still remain open to working with Congress. But I'd point out, too, we were engaged on this, well before more recent actions on VALID. VALID, by the way, or work on legislation, is a little bit different from what we're doing today. That's about putting in place a different framework for all tests. The action today is clarifying and making explicit FDA's oversight over laboratory-developed tests. But certainly prior to all that, and it's described in the history and rulemaking section in the rule, we took steps to address the issue starting in the late 1990s rather, taken a number of actions over the years, starting there was a focus on a subset of tests with draft guidance back in 2006, and we heard comment that we should put in place a holistic approach. So from 2010, 2016, we were working on that, and there was draft guidance issued. And then we heard about interest from some members in Congress and stakeholders about working on legislation to put in a new framework for everyone, and we've been engaged in that for almost 7 years. But our concerns have grown in recent years, and so we are moving forward with rulemaking, but always remain open to working with Congress, again, on that complementary activity.
Your next question comes from Lori of Washington Post. Your line is open.
Hi there. Thanks for doing it. It's Lori McGinley with the Washington Post. I'm trying to understand a little bit about what this exertion of authority is going to look like. Is it correct to say that some LDTs would end up being required to go through pre-market review, but some others, and it would depend on the risk involved? Or do you not know that at this point because some of these alternatives you're talking about could involve possible grandfathering of current tests or slower phase-ins for the academic medical centers?
So first of all, thank you for the question. The FDA current framework for tests, as with other devices, is risk-based. So low-risk tests are subject to certain requirements but don't come in for pre-market review. Moderate and high-risk tests and other devices do. The rule itself mentions certain carve-outs that we would put in place, such as around forensic tests and public health surveillance tests. But then we do see questions on some additional flexibilities, as you noted, that may include continuing enforcement discretion for pre-market review and quality system requirements for some or all tests currently on the market, as well as some additional flexibilities. And for those, we're seeking public comment, and we'll consider those comments when we move forward for a final regulation. So ultimately, what this would look like at the end is still open because we're seeking public comment.
Operator, we'll take the next question, please.
David of Politico, your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I wanted to ask about a legal memo that former HHS General Counsel Robert Charo wrote regarding FDA's legal authority in the LDT space. And I noticed that in the proposed rule, there are what appear to be rebuttals to some of the Commerce Clause and other arguments that were in that memo. Is that meant to kind of rebut, HHS's previous determination? I know that memo was withdrawn, but some of its previous legal determinations around the weaknesses of the LDT program when it comes to defining them as medical devices.
Well, I would just I put you back to the rule itself and what we state there. And I don't know of Elizabeth if you have more to add. When we get into the legal issues, I don't tend to speak on behalf of the agency from legal matters. No, agency attorneys.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Operator, we'll take the next question, please.
Brenda of CNN, your line is open. Brenda of CNN, your line is open.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for taking my question, and I apologize, I haven't had a chance to read the proposed rule yet. But as it pertains to the timeline, Dr. Shuren, do you, if the proposed rule becomes final, how long of a transition period would industry have to move to this new type of enforcement? And then another question I had was about grandfathering of tests. What will happen to the lab-developed tests that are on the market now? And I know you talked about some potential carve-outs for certain categories, but what would happen to, I guess, most of the ones in use now?
Well, certainly, and thank you for that. So there is a phase out that would occur over a 5-year period, and we sort of talk about what would occur in each of the 5 years as to what you need to come into compliance with. So in the beginning, in the first year, it's about sort of the adverse event and malfunction reports and, reporting on issues with the tests and what would essentially be the equivalent of recall in it. And it moves on from there to pre-market review is later down the line. As you note, we are seeking comment on whether or not we should continue enforcement discretion for tests that are currently on the market, and that would be for pre-market review and quality system requirements, but we would still be looking to put in place reporting requirements and surveillance and still take action if we identified a problematic test. But again, that's open for public comment, and we'll see what the perspectives are and then factor that into a final regulation. If we didn't continue that enforcement discretion, or continued in part for those tests that would be subject to pre-market review, as long as they sent us their submission in time, they'd stay on the market while we reviewed it. But again, all of that is open at the moment as we get public comment.
As a reminder, please press star 1, unmute your phone, and record your name and organization to ask a question. Lauren of CQ Roll Call, your line is open.
Hi, thanks for doing this. There was a lot of concern around exemptions for academic labs during debates about the VALID Act. I know you're seeking comments on this, but can you say anything about how you envision addressing academic labs in a different way if that is something you decide to address in the final rule?
Well, again, at this point, we're actually asking for feedback that, whether we should do it and if we should do it, what that would look like. So I don't want to prejudge that. That's why we seek public comments, and, we'll hear what folks have to say. And again, then we'll take that into consideration. They have certainly talked about that there are circumstances that may be more unique for them in their provision of patient care. But certainly we know with LDTs there and even more generally, There are plenty of LDTs that are very much the same as other marketed tests from non-laboratory manufacturers out on the marketplace as well.
Thank you. Operator, we'll take the next question, please.
Andy of Regulatory Focus, your line is open.
Thanks, folks. I was trying to actually understand the carve-out for the academic medical. So I'm still reading the rules, but am I to understand that you don't?
Hey, Dan, can you speak up a little bit? It's just a little hard to hear you.
Sure, Jen. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. So I was trying to understand carve-out for academic medical centers, and I'm still reading through the rule. So am I to understand there isn't a carve-out in the rule, and you're just asking for a carve-out? And if that's not the case, what's the carve-out for academic medical centers?
There isn't a carve-out at the moment. We wanted to hear more specifics. We've certainly tried to work with academic medical centers over the years to try to get a better perspective on, the rationale if there's some kind of a additional flexibilities, and then what that would look like. That best assures the test works, but also address justifiable needs on their part. So for here, we'll get the public comment, give an opportunity to hear that, and then go from there in the final rule. But I don't want to prejudge in the absence of getting comments on the rule. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have any more to add.
No, that's exactly right.
Thank you. Operator, we'll take the next question, please.
Elizabeth of Repeat, your line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm not from Repeat, I'm from STAT. I messed up that question, apologies. My question is about resources. I was curious if there'll be any sort of restructuring, reallocating of funds or staff within the agency as far as being able to enforce this rule and not do enforcement discretion anymore.
So certainly for and thank you for that. Certainly for the structure of the organization, I don't want to prejudge. We'll see comments we get in and move ahead to finalize the regulation. And certainly for resources, that is also open at the moment, as what the resource implications will depend upon what that final rule looks like. And we'll certainly are taking steps such as looking at expanding use of third-party review, which may tailor very nicely with LDTs. That would also reduce resource needs on the part of the center. And then again, this will sort of phase out as we're rolling into discussions of the next round of medical device user fees, and that would be a topic for discussion in those conversations.
Thank you. Operator, we have time for one more question.
Your last question comes from David of Politico. Your line is open.
Thanks for letting me ask a second question. I just want to get some clarity on if the agency has a goal for when they wish to publish a final rule in this space. Do you have an anticipated published date for a final rule?
That's ultimately up to the administration.
All right. Thank you very much. This concludes today's media briefing. A replay will be available on the FDA's YouTube page. If you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact the FDA press office at fdaoma@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
That concludes today's call. You may disconnect at this time.